Hello and welcome to Cryptids, Crypts and Coffee, the podcast where two awkward Brits talk horror with a bunch of unsuspecting guests. I'm one of your hosts, Lou Yardley. I invent worlds full of monsters just so that I can kill people. Today I'm drinking a lovely cup of tea out of a cauldron. And I'm with my lovely cousin.
Hello, I'm Janine Pipe. I also try to write stories and occasionally get them published. Today I'm drinking a Starbucks mocha out of my Nightmare Before Christmas mug and feeling very grumpy, so I apologise. And we have two Bristol massive guests with us today, the lovely Jeffery and Gemma Amor. Is that correct?
Yeah, that'll do.
Yes. How are you both?
Yeah, very well, thank you. I've just finished doing a bit of writing before I jumped on here, starting the next project. And yeah, in lovely, cloudy Bristol with my nice black coffee.
Nice.
Okay.
What are you up to, Gemma?
I'm good. I just took my friend's dog for a walk this morning. In the continued battle to wear my husband down and let him get me a dog. And I've been fiddling with some bits and pieces and drinking a very strong black coffee in my favourite mug, which I'm not sure if you can see. It's got a ship on it called the Vasa. It's from Stockholm.
Oh,
it was in January. And the Vasa is an old, it's a kind of museum. It was a ship that sank about 20 minutes after it was first launched. And it was perfectly preserved and it's really beautiful, very cool. So, yeah.
Oh, and we have an extra special guest. It would appear just over Lou's shoulder. Oh, so my cats never bother. They're downstairs somewhere under the dining room table, I think, and I try and coax them up because you get far more views if you've got a furry creature along with you, but no, they can't be bothered. Okay, so let's make a start then. So we thought, since it's the first time we've got four Brits on the show, let's go with good old British horror. So if we do it round robin, if we go Ross, Gemma, Lou, then myself. So what is your favourite British horror movie, Ross?
I was a bit confused on this one. I was wondering whether you meant British as in based, shot on location in Britain, or British director or such and such. So I've got a few options.
That's fine. That's fine.
One of the first horror films I ever saw, and I think I was about 8, so my parents, they need to hang their heads in shame, was American Werewolf in London. And
8, awesome.
It absolutely scared the crap out of me. And it wasn't even the kind of werewolf transformation bits. The bits that got me were the kind of nightmares that he had of kind of the SS uniformed masked vigilantes that came into his house and like butchered his family. But yeah, that for me was amazing. And it kind of probably disturbed me greatly. But then I loved also Psycho. I went and studied media arts and video production at university and had a love affair with Alfred Hitchcock. Like, that film for me is absolutely stunning. And then also another one I'll just chuck in there, well, 2 actually, Alien. Brilliant. And then 28 Days Later.
I hadn't thought of that one. That is a good film. Yeah.
When I was at university at this time, like, we were studying kind of how to actually make films with real film. And then 28 Days Later came out. And then by the time I'd finished my degree, it had all gone digital. So it was quite pointless. And I left not knowing how to edit digital films. But yeah, that's for me. American Werewolf in London, I think, is just, for me, kind of amazing British kind of production and film and like the scene in the subway and all that. And because obviously I used to live in London, all of that stuff kind of was just, that was where that was filmed, and it was just all, it was quite.
The Tube. We don't call it the subway. We call it the Tube, mate.
Oh, Tube. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, what are you on about?
God, it's so American.
Sorry. Oh, I should hang my head. I'm leaving.
British
Shame
horror.
on you. Go and sit on the naughty step.
I know. I'm just going to turn my chair around and just sit here.
Good. That's
I've
it.
already let the side down. Shocking. Shocking.
That was just for the benefit of all our American watchers, wasn't it? People that are listening to this
Yeah,
over
if I
there.
said
Yeah.
tube, they'd be like, what? He's standing in a tube. They
Yeah.
would- yeah.
Good save. Okay. All excellent films. I love American Werewolf in London. It is just amazing. Just some of the scenes now are hilarious as well. It is brilliant. Okay, thank you. Gemma, what's your favourite British movie?
So if we're talking horror movies, I've got three, I think, that for me kind of epitomise like a kind of British feel and what makes British horror a little bit more, I don't know, a bit special to me. So the most obvious choice is probably going to be The Wicker Man, the original, obviously the original movie, because the Nicolas Cage movie doesn't exist in my head. And I can't bring, which is actually really unfair of me because I've never seen it, but I can't bring myself to watch it because the original movie is just such a dear thing to me. But I think if we're talking British horror, and I don't like the word English because it's an exclusive word, but like those English themes, I suppose, then you can't really overlook the importance of folklore in kind of what British writers have always put into their kind of horror works. And I think The Wicker Man just taps directly into that, like local lore. I've spent a bit of time up there in Scotland, kind of especially this year and last year, and the kind of scenery, and there's a different ambience and atmosphere up there which creeps into that film so well and takes something really quite mundane and everyday, like a harvest festival, which is I guess what it essentially is, and turns it into this really sinister kind of strange cultish culture that's going on in the kind of arse end of nowhere. And it's just a really chilling film for me, like from start to finish, and particularly the final scene with Edward Woodward in the man, the Wicker Man himself, kind of just in his white robe. Finally, you can see it's dawning on him that he's about to be burned to bits. Yep. Like he hasn't almost kind of given that any credence until the point at which he is kind of stuffed inside this wicker cage, and he's just sort of screaming, Jesus Christ! And I just think like that scene lingered for me for so many years after I saw it. And it's a bit daft as well. There's lots of silly nudity and shagging in the fields. Sorry, I don't know if I can swear.
Oh yes, swear all you like.
It's just, and strange face masks and licking toads and just all this. It's just bonkers good, and it's I think quite a sort of British thing. Like anyone who's sort of lived in this country long enough and has gone to the local pub and been looked at by the locals if you're not from around there. Do you know what I mean? That anybody will know that feeling. And I think that comes across so well, because as a country, we can be quite exclusive, I think, of outsiders sometimes.
Definitely, yep.
Especially in the countryside and especially in rural locations. So that was my first one. My second one kind of taps into what Ross was talking about, the Tube, and it's Creep, with... I forget her name, but the actress from Run Lola Run, and she sort of finds herself trapped in the underground in the tube when late at night when it's abandoned, and she comes across all sorts of very wrong things. That's an icky film for me because I find in fact I have 4 films. I find I'm quite claustrophobic, so yeah, that gets under my skin quite a lot, that movie. There's a kind of abandoned operation theatre scene, which is really unpleasant. In a similar vein, the whole idea of claustrophobia, I think The Descent is an enormously important piece of work.
Yeah, that's one of my favourites. Yeah.
I mean, I hate the goddamn film. I can't watch it. I've watched it twice now, and I won't watch it for again because I am really claustrophobic, and because the idea of being trapped in the dark under thousands of tons of rock with no hope of escape is just there. That's again, it's a brilliantly done film. It's not exactly as if it hasn't been done before. It's not a new concept, but it's just done very well. And I think the dynamic between the group of women, I like movies that focus on relationships between women. I think that's handled really well. There's either camaraderie or backstabbing or kind of pulling together when they have to, or letting the tension kind of overtake and their survival instincts. And it's just, I'm not a huge fan of the final girl trope, but I think that's a movie in which it's done and it's handled reasonably well. And then, what was the last one? Was Dog Soldiers, which is Neil Marshall. Is it Neil Marshall? Which is a phenomenally good. Like, it's just so entertaining. It's so much fun. Sean Pertwee in that film just fucking rules for me. He's
it's brilliant.
It's so fun, like the idea of a military mashup with the traditional werewolf story as well. I love that film. Again, it's really simple concept. They're in the woods, they're in a cottage. It's a single kind of location movie. It's not overly complex. I like simple ideas done well, I think. So those are probably my top 4 British horror movies. And again, that they kind of do feed into folklore as well, like werewolves, and it's just, there's something about British horror and the countryside, I think, in particular, and natural things and weird spooky folk related things and kind of natural forces and stuff like that just, it works for me. I like,
definitely 100%. And you stole both of mine.
Sorry.
But that's fine. Okay, Lou.
So I'm working my way through the list now, and I'm going to completely lower the time.
Oh.
We talked about this a lot. We like comedy and horror, so I'm going to go for Shaun of the Dead.
Yay!
I was going to say Dog Soldiers, but that's gone. 28 Days Later's gone. Creep's gone. But as a newer horror film, Host
is actually, I think I watched it a couple of weeks ago now, and it's got, actually that should be my top 5. I think that's shot to the top of one of my favourite films of all time at the moment list, just for the, like, how scary it is. It's so scary.
Absolutely shit myself watching that. Yeah.
Just so little.
It's again, but it's a simple and it's an effective idea, and it's executed so, and in fact it blows my mind that they kind of wrote and made that during lockdown so well and so effectively, and just, and it's brilliant.
Did you have anything else, Lou?
Sorry,
By a cat.
Other than that, I did just have 28 Days Later, Dog Soldiers, Creep, and Host. Yeah, those were my 4. So I'm lucky to get Host in before Janine starts talking.
It's what always happens when I go last. So I didn't do a big list because my all-time favourite movie ever is Dog Soldiers, and there's just nothing that I don't like about that film. But Gemma's already stolen everything, including how amazing Sean Pertwee is. So
he is, though, in everything he does. And it's not, I mean, I wouldn't say he's the most, this is a horrible thing to say, but his characters that he gets cast into aren't always the most different or diverse. He tends to be Sean Pertwee in a lot of his films, but my God, can Sean Pertwee well? Do you know what I mean? It's like, he's
definitely
he's awesome.
100%. One of my favourite moments that's ever happened to me is that he retweeted something of mine, and I was like, yeah, that's it. I don't need anything else now.
Very, very watchable. Kind of character actor, I'd say. Like, yeah.
And I like that, the fact he plays himself in every film, doesn't he? But he is amazing, so keep going for it. And then sorry.
2 Weeks to Live.
In what?
In 2 Weeks to Live. It was like a short series that was on.
Yes, he was only in it for a few minutes, wasn't he? In his like silk robe. I did see that. And again, he played himself, so. And then because of Neil Marshall, the Dog Soldiers director, I also had mentioned The Descent, which I'm like you, Gemma, I love it,
but I
but
hate it.
it is one of the films that has terrified me more than anything. And I was in the cinema with my husband, literally, like I was like trying to get my feet off the floor, and I was like, just it made me feel horrible, and not because of the monsters or anything like that.
No,
It's all like the
claustrophobia.
That's it. When they're in that dark tunnel and you can't say, just the thought of that. I mean, I could never, you couldn't pay me to go caving or potholing or anything like that. I couldn't do it. Just absolutely, like, it was that whole thing where I wanted to watch but I wanted to close my eyes, and I was like, I don't. It was just awful, but brilliant. And again, just as you said, like the dynamics with the women in the film, it's a perfect film. Again, just absolutely horrendously terrifying.
I did a tweet about a week or two ago where I asked people what their favourite jump scare moments were in horror movies, and that the Descent came up an awful lot, because there's an amazing scene where they're in the dark and they end up shooting in infrared, I think it is, or looking through an infrared camera, and the camera pans around, and it's the first time you see the kind of cave monsters, and there's one just standing behind one of the girls, and it's such an effective jump scare moment. Because it's gone from this drama where they're trapped underground and oh shit, what's going to happen, to this kind of supernatural element, and it's really effective. It's well done. It's a slick movie, I think.
Definitely. I think I will just give, especially because we talked about Host, I'll give Ghostwatch a little nod as well.
Yes.
And of course, Stephen Falk's another one of our West Country peeps as well. So I've talked about it with Stephen at length, and I've talked because I watched it live back in, it's 92, wasn't it?
Yeah,
and it's the thing that scared me more than anything in my whole entire life. I can remember I wanted to sleep in my mum and dad's bed. I didn't care that I was 12. I was so frightened. And nothing scared me since as much, although Host almost got me. And of course, Host was massively inspired by Ghostwatch.
Yeah, it was. Yeah,
Rob and Jed, they grew up watching that as well, and they'd actually spoken to Stephen about it and everything. So I think that was when I knew that I had a real love-hate relationship with horror, that horror was everything, but also it absolutely scared the shit out of me.
But there's something really thrilling about being scared, and I think I was thinking about this when I was watching Host, because it's been a long time since a horror movie has scared me. I think I've become not desensitized, but I think when you work in the industry and you love horror and you consume as much of it as I do, either written or visually, or even with audio, you know what the moves are, you know the storyline, you know how the plot plays out, you just know, you get a feel for horror. And there's everything is also kind of derivative to a certain extent, so there's not that much that's new and unique. But for that reason, it's been, I think the last time I was genuinely scared by a horror movie was when I was about 18 and I watched Ringu, and the classic scene with Sadako crawling out of the television. I mean, I didn't sleep for about 2 weeks after that. But since then, not much has scared me. And I was watching Host, and the scene with the filters and the Sweet Alice mask, and there's I'm going to spoil it for anyone that hasn't seen it. Am I allowed to do spoilers, or?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So there's an incredible scene where this sort of filter pops to life on a call, and there's a mask, and it just very slowly it's hard to describe, you need to see it, just very slowly turns to look at the person filming, and I was actually really creeped. And then there's another scene later on towards the end with a bedsheet, and it was such a simple idea, and that's the kind of thing, if I was on my own in the house, that thinking about that would scare me. And then I was thinking, there's something quite fun about being scared. As an adult, the only things really that genuinely scare me now are things that might threaten my family or my kid or my personal safety. Nothing supernatural really scares me, but those little insidious ideas that Host did so well, things that could happen, things that make you turn the lights on when you walk around the house on your own. Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah,
I like that. I love the idea that we're still quite vulnerable as people and creatures, and it's kind of fun to be scared. that's the whole point, right? Like to realise how human you are. And
I think it's been a while since I've been scared as well, like properly petrified. But I think it's changed as I've got older with what I'm scared with. So like the indie horror, what's the Possum?
Oh, I haven't seen that yet.
Oh, it's brilliant. It's in this short story collection.
Oh, cool.
By Comma Press, by Matthew Holness, and like it is just. I think it's more. I'm getting more scared by kind of what monsters make of men and women, like the kind of internalization of horror and kind of what affects people and what drives people to do certain things. And yeah, with Possum, like it's stunning. It's such a brilliant piece of, well, the short story is brilliant, but what they've done in the film is just incredible.
Well, that's quite a prevalent theme in horror at the moment as well, I think, with the way horror is going, particularly with British horror and American horror movies. It's very much about internal demons and emotional horror, isn't it? And character-driven horror, which, again, I think Mike Flanagan is a really big part of that movement, like things with the Doctor Sleep. It's about the human side of horror. Rather than necessarily the beasties or the ghoulies or all that stuff. And I quite like that move. I quite like that, because even Host was a simple idea about an online seance, but you got a really good feel for the stories behind each of the girls as well that were on the call and their own sort of individual vulnerabilities and stuff. So I think it's a real trend in horror at the moment that I really enjoy. It feels like it's aimed more at us as well, like our age group, or like as viewers, it feels like there are things that horror can deal with and certain themes that horror can deal with really, really well, like grief and anger and death and loss and trauma, that perhaps other genres aren't in such a good position to be able to deal with. And I think that's what makes it so easy to consume, like as an adult. I don't know.
Yeah. Definitely. Okay, cool. Right. So moving on to authors then, aside from all of us, obviously. Ross, who are your favourite British authors?
Oh, good. I'm glad you said a few.
Yes. I had a feeling, yes.
I have a real love affair with kind of pulpy, kind of creature feature stuff. So I have to say that James Herbert, and
that's a very
Rats trilogy is just absolutely astonishing. And what I also like about this cover, which I found out recently, was that he had it white because all the horror covers that were coming out that were horror were all black, so he wanted it different. But yeah, James Herbert, I have everything he's done. Richard Haig, and I think this is a rare book. And I got it for like 20p near Corn Street. The Farm.
Oh, nice. Look at that cover. That's amazing.
Beautiful. Look at that.
That's amazing. I love it.
This is amazing. It's about kind of toxic waste creeping to a farm in the countryside and turns all the pigs crazy.
Nice.
Guy N. Smith as well. Locust and Accursed. I like those ones. They're pretty cool.
Yeah, look at the cover. See, do you know what? I love 80s, 90s paperback covers.
It's like the films as well, though, isn't it? Like films, painted posters, and now they're all kind of like rubbish.
Rubbish.
They are rubbish.
This is a really British word, isn't it? Rubbish.
Rubbish. Bloody rubbish. And then bringing it a bit more up to date, Lucy McKnight Hardy. The Water Shall Refuse Them. Again, kind of set in Wales, folklore. Yeah, this one was pretty creepy. I like that one. Aaliyah Whiteley, Skene Island, and she also did The Loosening Skin, which was bloody brilliant. Loosening Skin was kind of like people's kind of memories and stuff was held within their skin, so people could buy the skin and kind of wear them and use them, and it was quite nice. I'm a bit Gemma Amor. I've got all your books over there, but I didn't want to get them all out now. You're on the call, you know. Kev Harrison,
Yeah.
I'm kind of in a love affair with Kev at the moment. I'm buying everything he's done. But yes, and that's also on the Stoker's recommended.
It is on the recommended reading list, yeah.
Then I got 2 other Bristolians as well. Living in Bristol. Forest is Hungry, Christopher Stanley.
Chris is a good bloke as well. He's very
bloody brilliant.
Yeah.
But yes, and he also did I've got a few of other books. The Lamppost Huggers, which is kind of like flash fiction horror as well.
I think slash is his kind of comfort zone, isn't it? Short stories and flash fiction is like his forte. He does. He works a lot with. Is it Molotov Cocktail? I can't remember the name of it. Yeah.
But what I like about his work is because he works so well. He's really versed in flash. That his longer pieces, like I read another novella by Short Sharp Shocks recently, or some short stories. But basically, I think because he strips down everything from flash, that when he does the longer fiction, it just benefits greatly because it's just short and just snappy and just goes through. Obviously, Daphne du Maurier, but I haven't got her stuff up here. Roald Dahl again.
I've never read that, and I've always meant to.
It's brilliant. This one, I think it's also got. Sorry, taking up time. Oh no, it's this one. Kiss Kiss as well.
Yeah.
Which has got the landlady in it, which was a little bit of inspiration for Juniper as well. And then this other one's from Bristol as well. Ben Errington. I just linked in with him online, but it's another little pretty cool Bristolian shout out. One more. Shallow Creek.
That's I've got a copy of that.
Storgy Books. This is kind of it was competition. Lots of different stories written by lots of different authors, but they were all given like a place in a town and a character, and then they all link into each other. That
sounds really cool.
That's pretty cool.
It's a nice book as well. It's a nice looking book. I've got it on my shelf over
there. 21 stories in it. You've got Adrian J. Walker, Sarah Lotz, Aaliyah Whiteley, and then loads of other brilliant like new writers as well. But that's me. Sorry, I'll pass over now to Gemma.
I'm going to make a note. Shallow Creeks was that? I'm going to make a note.
Shallow Creek, yeah.
Okay, Gemma.
I've got all mine on my shelf. I didn't think to get them down, so you'll just have to do without the visuals for me. But I think if we're talking, say, like I'm a bit of a kind of classical nerd. Most of my favourite British authors were people like, which if you have been following anything I've posted over the last week, Angela Carter is a massive influence on my life, and on my work and on the things that I write about and how I write it. And also just the way she used magic realism and kind of combined it with radical feminism. And the more I learn about her in retrospect and kind of go back over her life and her works, the more I kind of keep falling in love with her. So she's a huge favourite of mine. In a similar vein, Daphne du Maurier, and I think Rebecca, I wouldn't say it's a horror novel, but you could make a good case for it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's one of the finest psychological thrillers, I think, written of ever. I just think it's an astonishing feat of writing and suspense and just emotion and interpersonal relationships and actually also kind of a slightly unreliable narrator in the narrator as well, whose name you never learn, and just the setting in Cornwall and everything about that book is just a phenomenal read, and I reread it once a year. If we're talking crime, and I've mentioned this lady before, is a lady called Mo Hader.
Yes, I love Mo Hader.
So she wrote Birdman, which I think was her debut, which is a horrendously violent novel. Again, it really informed some of the things that I write about, and it's more of a procedural. Sure. It's an astonishing book. It's more of a procedural crime novel, but it kind of essentially deals with necrophilia and kind of inner city London.
Very dark. Yeah,
it's very, very dark. The subsequent books didn't really speak to me as much in that series, but that book on its own as a standalone novel is astonishing, I think. Let's think, who else? I love Charles Dickens, obviously Mary Shelley. more recent writers, I would say I am a huge fan of Adam Neville, and The Ritual was one of my favourite books that I've read in the last sort of 5 years. Yep,
My choice.
Although
Reddening,
that book was like almost like 2 books sandwiched together as well. I thought like the first half of it was such one story, and then the second half, like, oh, okay, I didn't expect that at all. And I'm still mulling over like.
Yeah.
How much, do you know what I mean? I'm still mulling that over, but I think overall it sort of stayed with me, that book. And I love the idea of the relationship between these guys that were out there kind of trying to honour their friend. That was a very effective book for me.
Have you read The Reddening, Gemma?
Have I read what?
The Reddening by...
No, not yet. Again, that's kind of steeped in folklore and kind of
folklore.
The Devon countryside, and he's not far away from Bristol. Bristol's only a few hours away from Devon, and it's just I like to read things that I can recognise as well. I think sometimes with American settings, I sometimes don't get some of the nuances and sayings, and because I'm not from there. But it's kind of nice for me to read about, you know, like local things for local people. I'm also a huge fan again of I think Ross showed the collection that Possum was in had a story in by Hanif Qureshi, and he's one of my all-time writers. He wrote an amazing short story called The Body, about an old man who gets to kind of put his old brain back into the body of a younger man, and just how he copes with life, but sees it through age and experience, but with a young body. That's an astonishing book. And he also wrote a collection of short stories about relationships and love and sex, and he's just one of my favourite writers. I could go on. I could just basically just go on all day. But a book that also really, really knocked me sideways this year, or was it last year, is a lady, and it's not fiction, it's a non-fiction book. She's called Sue Black, and she's a professor of anatomy and I believe forensic anthropology. And she has had an astonishing career over the kind of her lifetime. She's basically been called out to help overseas in national crises to help identify bodies. So for things like the tsunami and Boxing Day tsunami and war zones and conflict zones where bodies need identifying, that's her kind of forte. And it's a book that talks about death, and it talks about death with a remarkable amount of warmth and humour, in a very practical way. Some of the things she talks about are enormously distressing, because that's obviously the job that she has, and identifying bodies and piecing bodies together is never going to be a fun job. But that she also talks in great detail about anatomy, and so things that I didn't realise, like when your body is developing and when you are growing, the things that you eat and ingest as you develop and grow kind of soak into your teeth, so they can do studies on your teeth to pinpoint exactly where you grew up in, like what part of Europe, based on the things they find in your teeth, which I think is astonishing. But I think overall it's more of a kind of discussion about dying and how actually uncomfortable we are like talking about death. Like we say things like, oh, he's passed on, or he's gone over, or do you know what I mean? And rather than just saying that person has died and let's deal with it, we're not very good with things like that. And it's a really astonishing book, and it's called All That Remains: A Life in Death, and it's all about her life and works. And I recommend anybody read that book. It will make you think, and just it's made me think a lot, and I can't stop thinking about it.
What was her name again, Gemma?
Sue Black, or Professor Sue Black, I think actually. And I think she's still a professor of anatomy, and she lives in Scotland. And she's also good friends with Val McDermott, the crime writer, and she quite often they consult her for kind of accuracy in some of her stories and things. So.
Awesome. See, I really struggled when I was thinking of British writers, and now as you two have both been, I've been like, oh, for God's sake, yes, obviously. They just wouldn't come to my mind. Okay,
Lou. One more is Tracy Fahey.
Oh yeah.
The Unheimlich Maneuver. this has got a story in it that when I read it, it absolutely blew me away. Hang on, let me find out what it's called. I look like you, I speak like you, I walk like you. It reminded me of kind of Daphne du Maurier's The Scapegoat. But it's absolutely phenomenal. And when I finished it, and then, you know, I tend to just contact a writer to tell them that I really enjoyed a piece of their work. I messaged her and she said that was one story that didn't actually do very well. Like no one really kind of appreciated it.
Yeah.
But since I spoke to her, I think it's been made into a film or a short film as well.
There we go.
But it's such a brilliant piece, and it's kind of about kind of domestic violence and kind of doppelgangers and all that stuff, and it blew me away. So, you know, that's
interesting. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Right, Lou, are you going to keep up with all of this academia, or are you going to lower the tone a bit with slugs and things?
I will lower the tone, but in a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I came up with this question and then I instantly forgot everyone who was British who wrote horror. But I thought I'd start with a more modern author, and that's a lady called Sarah England, or S.E. England. She writes a lot of occulty, folklore kind of stories.
Yeah.
And I just find them really, really creepy. And because they're all set in Britain, there's part of me that thinks, oh, this could be real.
Yeah.
Whereas reading stuff from American authors, there's that distance between you. So you think, no, it could be real, but that's all the way over there. That's never coming to get me. Other than Sarah, when I was first getting into horror, obviously I read Stephen King, but also I was really into James Brian Lumley, who I've mentioned before on here, with the Next Scope series, Graham Masterton, Clive Barker, and I think Janine knows who I'm going to say here. One of my all-time favourites is Sean Hudson.
Yeah.
So this one, pardon?
Good old Sean, I love him.
Yeah. For this one, I'm going to go for Sean Hudson and Slugs. And the reason I'm picking Slugs is because lots of it was set in Morden and the Civic Centre in Morden, and I used to work there. So I was a place where there was flesh-eating slugs.
I hate slugs. I absolutely fucking hate slugs more than any other. I stood on one in the middle of the night once when I was going to the toilet. And I've never forgotten it. I've never ever. And actually, I was woken up in the middle of the night in the same house. It was a little old bungalow with wooden floors and massive gaps between each of the wooden floors. And I remember waking up in the night and I'd left my anorak is such a British word. My anorak on the floor in the corner, and it's rain-proof material. I remember waking up and I just heard this noise, and it was like. And I was like, what the fuck? And I turned the light on, and it was a ginormous slug literally chomping on the fabric of my anorak. And they have teeth. So I put a message out, and I was like, do slugs have teeth? This is obscene. Yeah. And they have these nasty little weird teeth things that, oh my God, I was so traumatized.
A sandworm.
I fucking hate slugs.
I'm reading slugs.
Oh. No, I agree. They are repulsive, and there's no need for them. Most revolting bug-type creatures, you can say, oh, well, they do this for the environment and whatnot. Slugs, no fucking use whatsoever.
Well, they break down waste and stuff, don't they? So I suppose in that sense, they're kind of
not good enough. So do snails.
I'd be okay swimming in waste, to be quite honest with you, if we could get rid of slugs. I'm all right with it. I hate everything about them. I hate how they don't have any visible eyes, and how they're just one long slimy thing with no real shape. They're really amorphous, and I hate them. Sorry.
They have the orange skirt as well sometimes.
Just get out of my house and off my land.
Get off my land.
Get off my land.
We've got family property in France, and the slugs over in this particular place, they're massive, absolute, and bright orange as well. Massive, bright orange, repulsive, disgusting thing.
I need an adult. Please.
Yeah. That's no need for them.
I'm struggling.
Okay, right. So moving back. So yeah, Adam Neville is excuse me, definitely one of my most favorite authors as well. And he's actually become quite a good friend of mine. He's really just a really down to earth and lovely person, as well as being a phenomenal writer.
Seems
And
to
he
spend
said
most of his time in a canoe as well, which I quite like.
he does. Yeah, he does. Well, in between, home with his wife and his daughter, and they seem to have this idyllic life where they, like you say, they go off and they buy local fish, and then they have a walk around the seaside and stuff, and he's just such a lovely guy, and he's given me loads of advice on things as well, and sent me his new book, which is good. Then one of the other people that I was going to mention is this lady, CJ Tudor.
Oh yes, yeah.
So Kaz again is quite a good friend of mine, and I got to know her after the Chalkman came out, and she again is just one of these people where she's going, I mean, she's with this penguin, isn't it, anyway? So she's going places, but she's so down to earth and such a lovely person, and she will try and do things to like give back to the community and all that kind of stuff. She's just I loved the Chalkman. I loved the other people, but this one was my favourite, The Taking of Annie Thorne. So I don't know if any of you have read this one.
I was going to start with Chalkman. It's been on my list for ages, so
yeah, Chalkman is fantastic as well. This one gave me one of my favourite Stephen King's is Desperation. And this gave me vibes because it's kind of set without giving anything away, it's all to do with like an old mining town, so there's all like that to do with it. And again, that's another really British thing. I know that they have mines and things like that all over the place. I'm reading a Hunter Shea book that at the moment, Ghost Mine, that involves mining, but there's something in my mind that takes you up north, you know, sort of all over into Wales, and
it's like
the ponies and stuff.
Mining culture as well is quite steeped in tragedy for us, isn't it, as well, with the disaster what was the name of the town in Wales for the landslide. I think it's become kind of almost part of law, because mining hasn't been a viable business now for about 20 or 30 years, has it? And also like politically with miner strikes and everything, it's just I think it's a really important part of our history and modern history, but also a very sad kind of. And then if you take it right back to the origins of mining as well, when child labour was used, and just like the idea of mines being kind of tragic, haunted places. I've toyed with the idea of writing a story set in a mine shaft myself, because also that claustrophobia element.
Definitely,
yeah.
It's the whole like Tommy knockers and that kind of thing. There's all of that different kind of, like you say, like superstition to do with them as well. And you can see how you would have driven yourself completely nuts down in those mines, just starved of light and just all of that for days on end. You can see why people went completely insane down there. So yeah, definitely. I think if any horror book that's set in a mine, then it's like definitely it's going to scare the life out of me.
Yeah.
And since we moved slightly on to your crime things as well, I think I'll give a little shout to Agatha Christie.
Christie, of course. Christie's my favourite. And also Death on the Nile, I think, is one of the most enjoyable books ever written. It's just good value every single time you read it.
That is one of my favourites. Is I must get there. It's And Then There Were None. That's what it's called now, isn't it? I know it's had so many different name changes.
Wow, what a sad book! What a really sad book.
Yeah, but I absolutely adore that. And then I've also given another nod to Boris Starling. And in particular, one which I would say is in every way a horror, although a serial killer horror, is a book called Messiah. I don't know if any of you have read that, or if you've seen, there was a TV adaptation of it.
I was going to say, I think I've seen the TV adaptation. I don't think I've read the book. But...
Yeah. Again, all centers around a serial killer, but who kills people in like biblical ways. So like somebody's crucified and then someone has their head cut off, like all the different sort of apostles and things. And that is, the book is as often is even darker than the TV show was. Really, really messed up. And it was one of the first books I can remember reading that has just the scene, which, because I used to be a police officer, so I have been to scenes like this, where you just walk up to the door and you can just see the heaving mass of black flies on the window, and you know that you're going into something that is not going to be very nice.
I can't even imagine how. I can't imagine working in a job where that's even a possibility. Like, I think that's astonishing. That I suppose it becomes normalised for you in a way, though, right? Because it's just your job, and that's how you approach it. Like, I'm here to do a job, and what else can you do? You can't run away from that. But to me, the idea of that is so unbearably horrifying. And I think like goes back to that thing, like, what are the things that actually scare you? Like, is actual true things that humans do to each other, I think, and that's that side of it more than the beasties and the monsters. And I have massive kudos for anyone that can work in law enforcement or any job where that's even a possibility.
Yeah, my wife she was working for the British Transport Police, and she was just in an office job, but then they kind of got her into this room and doing the training and stuff, and they said, right, we've got a folder that we want you to look at, and if you're a bit queasy, you might not be for you. But she was like, oh, I'm game, let's have a look. And they got a folder out, and it was all these kind of incidents that happen on train lines, and they had like
trains are the worst, aren't they?
Photos, crime scene photos of these people that had overdosed in a toilet. No one had found them for a few days, so they were black. And then there was like someone that had jumped off a bridge using a telephone wire to hang themselves, but actually the wire cut their body off, so their head was just hanging over this. It was horrific. And I was like, what point did that serve? And she was just like, I don't know. Like,
we need some trigger warnings on this.
Some trigger warnings on,
that seems a bit extreme if she was just like in an office.
Exactly. I was
it's a bit cruel.
You just in data, like, what? You're not going to be out there looking at these things. But I think they were just showing what happens on what they cover, type of thing. I was just like, bloody hell, bit much.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's when you've got the bag and you're scooping up the bits that you find along the tracks. Yeah, that's never nice for anyone. No.
Nice.
Oh dear. Okay, so on that note, what was next? Differences. What do you perceive to be the differences between British and American horror? What makes us unique to our Yankee friends?
I'm gonna jump in on this one, I think, because I think particularly as well, like over the last couple of years, like getting to know the horror community and so many of us being in America, I think the concept of local is very, very different for an American than it is for a British person. So by that I mean, like, so for example, I've got friends who would say to me, how long have you got to drive to get to where you're going? And I'll say, oh my god, it's a really long drive, it's like 5-6 hours. And they'll be like, what? Like, that's nothing. That's like going going to the shop for me, and like I'm going to go and drive for 25 hours, and that's not. And it's like, so the sense of scale in the US, I've never been, and I'm desperate to go. And this year I was supposed to be there over the summer to do a huge road trip with my family, and obviously because COVID fucked everything up, I couldn't do it. But the sense of scale, I think, is so different in the US that I think it changes the nature of what you think of as local. So we were saying earlier about things like the Wicker Man and kind of local lore and folklore, and that sense of place and location. The differences between that and when you see something set in the US, to me, it's very, very different. Like, everything's a smaller scale in England. Houses, property, towns, streets, cars, everything is smaller. And then you see a movie in kind of some like indeterminate part of America, and the houses are vast and enormous, and they've got huge cellars and basements, and they have huge cars and roads, and I think it gives things, like in movies, I'm talking mostly, I think it gives things a really different sense. So I think one of the reasons that British films are quite claustrophobic in how they feel and come across is because there's that sense of scale. Everything's smaller and less dramatic and less over the top, and I think we as people are like that as well. We're not as grand in our like gestures and how we talk, and we're smaller people. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think there's a real difference between kind of horror over the pond in terms of scale and ambition and size, and then what we focus on, which tends to be more granular and smaller and more concentrated. Does that make sense? Like that's for me anyway, like personally, that's how I feel when I consume the different types. Although having said that, I've seen some really awesome films just lately, like Scare Me on Shudder, which I will quite happily just rave about until I die. But that was brilliant because that was small setting, cabin setting, small like the concept was neat and boxed in and tidy, and that felt almost like a British stage play for me, like sitting down in a theatre and watching a stage play, and I thought it was just brilliant. It absolutely just ticked all of my boxes for me. I think there are a few more films like that kind of being made by Hollywood now that perhaps weren't being made 10, 20 years ago. Do you know what I mean? I feel like it's changed. Hollywood's changed. Yeah, that was my two penneth.
Awesome. Summed it up perfectly, I think. Ross, anything left to add?
I think it's along the same lines that I was thinking as well. Like, I think there's more of a kind of subtlety and an atmosphere that the kind of British horror goes with, but again, that's because everything's smaller and more insular, which helps build that kind of tension and the narratives and stuff like that. But I think as well, there's that rich, and we spoke about it already, but that rich kind of staple of folklore that we have. And I'm obviously not American, I don't know what kind of folklores they have, but quite a lot of them are kind of, for us, every single little location where you are has its own folklore and myth and mythology and things like that. And kind of like, when I think of that, I think of like Neil Gaiman and like his kind of stuff that he writes, and it's just a rich and varied amount of different folklores. Like, you have witches and other kind of little creepy crawly things that live in caves and mines and all that type of stuff. And but I think that's all kind of all steeped in the kind of traditional kind of Gothic as well that we have. And like thinking of Mary Shelley and Bram Stoker and stuff like that. Although they are horror novels, quite a lot of that is the setting that they're in, and it's that kind of Victorian London or the Victorian kind of setting that they're in that kind of make it even more creepier. I guess, I don't know, Americans probably think the other way, that their horror is very good as well. But
I mean, they have a healthy kind of what's the word, litany of cryptid kind of based horror over their creatures and monsters, and I guess they do also, that's kind of American version of folklore, based on their personal history. But I think with England, we've got such a long period of history over which folklore and traditions have built. So you've got a mix of kind of Celtish and Gaulish and Roman and like just all these different influences that have come to Britain over kind of a couple of thousands of years. And we've got all of that kind of working in our favour, I think. And it's just... I think it certainly influences people like Adam Neville when you read his stuff. You're reading like almost like reading a folklorist's kind of, do you know what I mean? And it's, I think America has obviously maybe a shorter period over which their history is developed and their kind of mythology, which also probably makes a bit of a difference. But then, you've got, like, they have Sasquatch and, like, they've got their own beasties and
it's not Mothman, all that kind of stuff.
It's not like they don't have that. I think it all comes from human imagination as well, and superstitions and traditions and all sorts of things. Like for us, Beltane and like all this stuff, and from where Halloween came from, and it's just years and years and years and years of kind of human tradition, all kind of coming to what we've got now, which is this melting pot kind of smorgasbord of stories. And I think that difference is quite marked sometimes with American horror.
Lou, anything to add?
Not really. I was going to say about the folklore element as well, because our country's so old. But also what Gemma was saying about our country being a lot smaller, I hadn't thought of that before, and it does make a lot of sense. And next time I'm asked this question, I'm stealing that answer.
Yeah, my two things that immediately came to mind were location, again, with it being, as you said, so much smaller, and just the history, when we've got a country that's absolutely steeped in history. And I think that possibly for America, some of their like what I would say scariest horror would come from things like the Native American traditions and like the Wendigo and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think they're still slightly touchy with what they can and can't use because they don't want to offend people and use things in the wrong way, sort of thing. So yeah, just the fact, and even like for us guys being down in the West Country, we've got things like all of like Wessex and Camelot and King Arthur and all of that sort of stuff as well. There's just yeah, definitely, as Ross said, sort of every town and village around here has got a local story. We've all got like a hanging tree or something, there was,
and druids as well, and the whole mythology around. Just jumping in on that, so I used to work for in Britain we have historical societies that protect a lot of our really ancient monuments and buildings and things. So I used to work for one that used to be called English Heritage. I think it's now called Historic England. And I used to steward at Stonehenge at the summer solstice, which was amazing fun. And like the job basically revolved around confiscating weapons from druids and like 8 foot tall pikes and staffs and things like that, and ceremonial swords. And it was like, and that was kind of all just in a day's work. Like it wasn't even, you just sort of, you kind of blinked once or twice and you were like, no, you can't come in here with a double-headed axe, sorry. But and then it's just like, off you go, and that's such a rich part of our history. I guess it's a similar thing with maybe, like you were saying, like shamans and Native American kind of history and stuff, but that's all the colourful, brilliant things that make horror awesome and rich and textured, and I love it. I love all of that. Sorry, I keep interrupting, but like
that's
just get me really excited.
And that's for us, that's where we are, isn't it? I mean, I'm 15-20 minutes from Avebury here, so again we've got Silbury Hill, all those kind of things, all like the Viking burial mounds and stuff. It's just something which is here. Every single town's got their legend about the old lady that lived in the woods and was she really a witch and all that kind of stuff. We've got so much, whereas I think with the Americans, they have got history, but they have to really dig for it. You have to sort of whether it's like Civil War stuff, or I mean, I guess you've got like Salem and whatnot, but then that's been done so many times that it's harder for them to find more stuff that is new, whereas we can dig up myths and legends from anywhere and think, I don't think anybody's done that one before. We are lucky with what we've got over here, that's for certain.
I wish I knew more about kind of folklore and mythology in the US, and it's something that I wish I understood more of, because I know each state, I mean, because America is so vast in size, I know each state has got its own individual flavour, and there's kind of Cajun influences, and like it's just, there's stuff that I know exists that perhaps I just haven't really seen in mainstream media. And I wish I knew more about that. And I think also this for me kind of leads into the idea of diversity in horror, where I am getting a little bit bored of seeing kind of sorority girls, white girls getting murdered, and like only learning about middle class white American culture. And I'd like to see horror that deals with more than that. But then in Britain, we fall foul to that a lot as well. We only really deal with kind of, unfortunately, like white middle class British like concerns and mythology, and actually our own culture is a lot richer than that, and the horror that we produce perhaps doesn't necessarily reflect the kind of multicultural makeup of our society at the moment. And I would like to learn more about all these different things and influences and legends, and because the world is a fascinating place in that sense, and I think horror is in such a good place again to like explore all of that. Yeah. But it's like you say, it's about doing it without being like culturally appropriative or offending anybody, or making sure that you use people who have actual knowledge of those things without kind of putting your own stamp on it in a bad way, if that makes sense. So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And I think that as we're all becoming more, like you said, there's so many of us that want to experience more about like writers that are people of colour and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, I think that people are also becoming more aware of being careful. If you're like us, a white person that is writing about a character within one of your books, make sure you do it properly, whether that means speaking to somebody of that ethnicity or culture or something, just to check. You know, I do think that that's an important thing as well. We can't kind of think to ourselves, oh, I'm going to be really, you know, good, and I'm going to make sure I've got this character in my book, and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. You need to make sure that that person's represented properly, and that there's no way that you're going to offend anybody. All of that as well that goes with it. Right, okay, brilliant, thank you very much. Okay, so that was kind of our round robin where we all answered, and Lou and I did our best to try and still have something left from you two stealing everything. So these are some questions.
Answers like really in depth, and they got to me, it's like slugs.
Yes. How long did we talk about slugs for? You know?
Yeah, but like you still traumatized me, so
Gemma's bringing up the you know, the academic level of this podcast.
I'm afraid I'm just a real nerd. That's probably why I didn't have many friends when I was a kid, quite honestly.
Nerds rule. Nerds are the best. Right.
They do now. They didn't then.
No, I know. Okay, Ross, what are you working on that you can tell us about at the moment? This is your chance to shine.
I am currently just finalising the edits for Home, which is my kind of next chapter of Juniper. It has gone to the editor, and she's just helping me a little bit with because it's set in America, so she's helping me with some of the Americanisms, and I wanted a little bit more kind of southern accent for my characters. Obviously, my only knowledge is through film, which isn't the best, so I've asked her to kind of help me kind of get the accents correct. But yeah, so that should be out end of October, and I'm currently working on my next book, which is called Hostage. A little bit, which is set in Polperro in Cornwall. And again, as we've been discussing already, I'm borrowing some folklore and mythology, and it's a couple, husband and wife, who have gone to Polperro in their off season to get over the loss of their child, who was kind of incompatible with life at birth, but whilst there they discover something in the water. And yeah, that's kind of all I'm going to say. I'm 10,000 words into it, and yeah, that's about it so far. And then I've got a couple of, I think 3 or 4 short stories coming in a collection shortly with the publisher that probably all of you know, but don't know if I can say it yet, so I won't. And yeah, that's about it.
Awesome. Gemma, what are you working on at the minute?
Okay, so I am working on quite a number of things. Probably too many things. I think I'll start with the charity anthology that I'm editing or co-editing with Laurel Hightower, who many of you know and love. She wrote an incredible book called Crossroads, which has just come out this year, and I think that's also made the Stoker recommended reading list, rightly so. Laurel and I think have a lot in common in that we tend to write quite female-centric horror that's very, very emotionally centred and character-driven, and deals with some quite strong and stern themes. So the anthology we're working on together is being published by a small boutique press called Burial Day Press, and that's run by Sina Paleo, and again, who many of you probably know and heard of, and she's an incredible writer and poet in herself. And it's called We Are Wolves, and for me it was a direct response to a lot of the stuff that's been happening in our community over the last year. There have been multiple kind of examples, not just in our community but across sci-fi and stuff as well, of authors perhaps abusing their positions to act inappropriately towards kind of other more vulnerable people, or less informed people. I won't go into too much detail because I don't think those people particularly deserve a voice or a platform, but what I have noticed is an awful lot of talk and division in the community as a result of some of these things and revelations, and it really upset me on a personal level, on a very deep level, that one person's actions could have such a big ripple effect and divide an extremely supportive and very warm and fun community for me that I've always loved being a part of. And it was kind of heartbreaking to see camps popping up and people kind of attacking each other and going for each other when actually it was down to the actions of one person. So kind of, no offense, but fuck them. I thought I would actually do something and put kind of that frustration into action. And so I reached out to Laurel because she wrote an extremely beautiful story called Smile. No, When Your Heart Is Breaking, I think it's called, based on the song. And it was in response to a tweet that I did where I said I was really fucking fed up of being told to smile by random strangers because I didn't always really want to. And she wrote this incredible story about a woman who was told to smile one too many times. And it just struck such a chord with me. And I thought, why not combine this kind of desire to do something, like have some action, take some action against some of the stuff that's been happening this year, with these kind of really strong themes, mostly to do around being a woman, I have to admit, and the kind of individual experiences of being a woman, because unfortunately assault and abuse can be often more directed towards those of kind of female orientation. And that's not to say that it doesn't happen the other way, and I know it absolutely does, and I don't want to make it a gender-based thing, but quite often on the internet, and as a horror writer, a female horror writer in this business, I have personally experienced quite a lot of stuff like that. So the long and short of it is we're producing this charity anthology. I think it's about 20 women in the community, or people who identify as such, and we're writing a series of kind of short stories and poems and dark fiction, and the idea is to raise money for, I believe it's going to go to the Survivors Trust to help the victims of sexual abuse. So that's the first thing I'm doing. That's coming together really, really nicely.
Fantastic.
I'm also working on a novella called Girl on Fire, which is an expansion of one of my stories from my first short story collection called Girl on Fire, and it's always been one of my most popular stories. So I'm going to kind of give the character in that, Ruby Miller, her own kind of a bit more to do and a bit more to say. That's due to come out in Halloween, if I can get my bum into gear. I'm also working on a kind of short-ish novel for the indie publishing house Cemetery Gates Media. It's called 6 Rooms. It's about a mansion in the US, and each chapter kind of deals with a different room in the house and things that have happened. So it's a lovely kind of traditional ghost story haunted house thing, which I've not done yet and I'm really excited about. Again, that's quite difficult for me because I'm not American, so I'm having to do a lot of research, and I'm working quite closely with Joe, who's one of the publishers, to get as much information and background as I can.
Joe's great. He's
good
so
lad,
helpful. Yeah.
Very helpful, and he's got a really strong vision for what he wants, which as a writer, I really like that. As a writer for hire, having as much direction as possible is always really nice.
Yeah.
On top of that, I'm working on I've decided for some reason to bring out a short story collection as soon as possible. I think I'm going to call it Places We Fear to Tread. I was going to call it All the Stories You Didn't Want, because it's basically all of the stories that I've had rejected over the last year compiled into a book. But I thought that was probably a bit too passive aggressive, so I haven't done that. They're just stories that for whatever reason didn't fit or didn't necessarily work with what the target market wanted. So that's nearly done, and I'm also working on a novel which is something a bit different for me. It's kind of a bit more conceptual. It's a sort of virtual reality thriller. The working title for that is Collection. On top of that, I've got a few things for a few different podcasts, and that's pretty much all I can tell you at the moment. I've got some other things in the mix, but and I've been working on a movie as well, a short film with a very nice chap, Dutchman called Jeroen van. He's probably going to hate me for that. That's in pre-production stage now. I think we've just finalised the screenplay. It's very short. It's only going to be a short movie, and that will be exciting to see how that pans out. So, and its working title again, I think, is called A Basement, but that may or may not change. Yeah, that's me.
I'm exhausted. Just
so am I, mate. I'm really tired.
Just a few things.
Do you have a day job, Gemma? Like,
this is my day job. This is So
yeah.
I worked in business marketing for about 10 years, and I was made redundant about 2.5 years ago. So I just decided to take the plunge.
Good for you.
Yeah, and it worked out. And I think actually, I've always wanted to do this or something like this. I've always been a writer, like most of us. We've done it since we were kids. But I'd written maybe, I'd say 10, 11 novels and never really finished. I'd always gotten to that sweet spot around 50k words and never been able to do anything with it. And it was just so frustrating to not have, because when you do a day job, then you come home, like your energy levels are so low, and you're switching from one person to another is just very, very difficult and exhausting. And I take my hat off to anybody that manages to write a book and do a full-time job as well and look after kids. And that, just for me, I needed to put myself into it like 110%. So since I've been able to do that, I've been able to make it work for myself and pursue it as much as I wanted to. So
awesome. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, what made you decide to become a writer, Ross?
I've always kind of enjoyed writing and making up stories, even from a young age. But I lacked the intelligence when I was little. I at school was picked on by my teachers at secondary school. I only really started reading properly as an adult.
Fuck those teachers. I think if teachers pick on kids for whatever reason, fuck them, because that's so negative for the rest of your life.
It is. And I didn't pick up a book. Well, I read, what was it? I remember. That's how much I cared. But I didn't pick up a book until after I'd finished university, probably.
That makes my blood boil. Fuck that. I think fuck that all the way to the moon and back, because like teachers are there to inspire and to motivate and I've had two. I had a really good and a really bad teacher, and the really good one stayed with me. Just fuck that. It just makes me cross. Sorry.
It's all right. And so she used to make us kind of like read out in class, and I wasn't very confident. So every time I'd stumble over something when I was reading it, she'd say, "You need to start again," and then that just anxiety going, and I couldn't. Yeah, pretty much. I used to love telling stories and like making stories and playing with my toys and just doing my own kind of stuff. And I'd watched loads and loads of horror films and just started dabbling myself with kind of writing and stuff. I'm still very bad at kind of the spelling and grammar and punctuation and all that, because I think I was kind of not even diagnosed as having a kind of, I don't know, issue. Back when I was at school, it wasn't a thing. But so I kind of still struggle with that today. But I kind of persevere.
That's what editors are for. That's what a good editor is for. Like, it shouldn't interfere with the story, I think.
Yeah, no, I've worked with 2 really good editors recently, which has been brilliant. And I've got better. Like, you know, it's true what they say, like the more you write and read, the better you become. And, you know, since I started reading again, like I just plow through books and just learn from kind of masters of the genre and stuff. And then I think it was about 4 years ago, I kind of then started writing some short stories and sending them out to see if anybody would publish them. And then someone contacted me about one I wrote called Bethesda, which was the reimagining of kind of the pool of Bethesda in the Bible and set in the modern time, set on the beach in Bournemouth. And then someone messaged me back and said, I really enjoyed this. Would you let me publish it? And I was like, wow, okay, yeah, that's fine. Just gave it away, didn't know what was going on. And then I thought, actually, I can do this. And like all the kind of bad memories I had of being a kid and being shut down in class kind of went away. And then I just started writing short fiction, wrote it for a long time, dabbled in Flash. And then, so Juniper was my kind of longest thing I've ever written, which kind of came really quickly and really easy, the idea. It was an idea I had when I was kind of at university. I was trying to make a short film about a crazy old woman who gets a flatmate because she needs extra money and things go a bit weird. So that was kind of what made me want to be a writer. Like, I've always had stories and I always kind of have ideas and things in my mind that I need to just kind of get out. I've got like loads of journals that are just full of ideas and snippets of conversations and things like that I kind of just keep and then pull out and drag things out to when I start writing again. But yeah, fuck my teacher.
Yeah. Definitely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, anyone can spell, anyone can work out the grammar and sentence structures, but not everyone's got the ideas. So,
but also it doesn't matter. Like, the idea of fucking gatekeeping towards children. I had a teacher. I had 2 very different English teachers. I had my first year English teacher, and I was in love with the idea of writing. And I remember I sat down and I wrote this terrible fantasy novel. I was only 13. I put it in an exercise book. I laminated it in sticky back plastic and like drew the cover and I gave it to my teacher, who was called Mr. Hayward. Mr. Hayward, if you're out there at all. And it was terrible. It was just like, it was 13-year-old fan fiction, I guess. And he read it and he took the time to read it and he came back to me and he encouraged me and he supported me, and that stayed with me for like all of my life. I had another teacher who I won't name, and he asked us to keep reading diaries and to read books and to write down what we'd written in our books. Now, I was an only kid when I grew up, and I didn't really have much going on for me because I was in the middle of nowhere in the countryside, but there was a library that I went to 2 or 3 times a week, came back with stacks of books, and so I started writing these all down in my reading diary. And I remember he stood up in front of the class when I gave him my reading diary, and he made fun of me for not really having a life because I was reading all of these books. And I think about that all the time. I think about, as an English teacher, making fun of a kid for having a love of reading and literature, and fuck him. And like, I just think like there are teachers who set you up for life, and Mr. Hayward was one of those teachers, and I was insanely lucky that I had him. There are other teachers who I think can really leave an impression on you as a kid, and I wonder how many children don't go on to do the things that they dream about because they don't get the encouragement that they need, and that really hurts me. Like, that the idea of being mocked as a child for being enthusiastic about something hurts me on a like deep fundamental level. So I am very cross at Ross's teacher, and they can go fuck themselves.
I think also it's quite strange as well, because even like, it's diverging slightly, but even now, like with Juniper, it was I'm really proud of it. It's also on the recommended reading list for the Stokers. So yes, teacher, who told me I was rubbish.
Yeah.
But then also, like with Juniper, like I was kind of linked in with an indie publisher to kind of publish it, and they brought in a quite well-known author to kind of read over it and give their kind of views on it as a potential project. And he sent me, I've got it here actually, like a very long email that I keep in my desk drawer and pull out from time to time to just read it and stick my fingers up at it. But like, he was scathing, and it was really personal, really, it's not really about the writing itself. It was more about kind of me and what I was doing and why was I doing it, and that I should go back to short stories because this isn't good. It was awful. And it when I got it, and I then started kind of, and it was because obviously this is the biggest thing I'd written since ever, and I was really worried that it wasn't any good. And then I started panicking, and all the old kind of things from my childhood started coming back, like, oh, you're no good, you should stop it, you should not do it. But actually, I don't care what he said. I write for me, and if other people enjoy it, then they enjoy it.
That's what I was going to say. I have this conversation a lot with people when they talk about imposter syndrome as well, and how you get over imposter syndrome. And I think one of the best ways of getting over imposter syndrome is to stop thinking about what other people think of what you write. I mean, it's lovely to get that feedback, and constructive feedback is awesome and can change a book completely and turn it around from something okay into something special. And the reader reaction you get, of course you want those good reviews and that good feedback, but at the heart of it, why are you writing? Are you writing for other people, or are you writing for yourself? And like me personally, I write for me. And okay, I would be devastated if something I wrote went out into the world and everybody hated it, but I write, the reason I write is for me, like, so that I can tell the stories I want to tell. And the idea that you may not get over that barrier of self-belief because perhaps somebody has been very critical, highly critical in a way that isn't very constructive, or because you don't believe you're good enough, or like it almost doesn't matter if you're good enough. Like, good enough for who? Like, good enough for yourself. And I think that's something that I've had to teach myself over and over again in this game over the last 2.5 years, is that, are you good enough for yourself? Are you happy with what you wrote? Then the chances are that it's going to resonate with your readers. Do you know what I mean? Like, not always, not in some cases. Sometimes you read something and you think, okay, that probably could have used a bit more work or a bit more feedback. But 9 times out of 10, if your passion shines through, that's enough, I think. And I think it's really important. And feedback is such a nuanced thing, isn't it? Like, I've used beta readers. I've used Ross actually as a beta reader on some of my stuff in development, and I've used a couple of other trusted beta readers and a developmental editor called Dan Hanks, who's a lovely chap. And I trust their feedback. I trust them to be critical in the right place, but also to be useful with it. Like, I don't want someone to stroke my ego and tell me I'm amazing. I want you to make my book better. Feedback that's personal, though, is I don't understand that. And I always think I use the motto, another motto is that it's not me, it's them. there's normally something going on with them if they make it highly personal, and it's not about you. But that's just life, I think, in general as well. When people act in a way that you don't really understand, it's normally to do with them instead of you. But got a bit profound there, sorry.
That I was gonna say, that just makes me, I've worked in a school, and we were constantly told to encourage the children, especially with reading and writing, because now there are so many children, it's such a high percentage, and I was shocked, that do not have access to any reading material. Nothing at all. There's not even a newspaper in their house. And when you hear things like that, and then you hear people actually taking the piss out of you for reading books, that makes me actually like feel physically sick. Actually, I haven't been an educator,
but also when you're a child as well. I mean, I was probably more of a pre-teen than a child, but like it made me feel bad about myself. It made me feel like I had no friends. It made me feel like a nerd. I didn't stop reading because fuck him, but also because I had nothing else to do. But like it just, these things sink into your psyche as a kid, and those early years at school are so informative. Definitely. And I have a son, and he's 7 years old, and he loves reading comics because that's the most accessible thing to him. He loves listening to audiobooks, and he loves all the classics, but his reading is still, he's a bit behind, and it's taking him a while to get the hang of it. particularly with COVID and everything over the last year. But it doesn't matter. He's still reading. He's reading comic books and he's loving it. I hear him in his bed at night giggling away to himself. And it's the idea of enjoyment.
Yep.
Like, are you enjoying this? Then that's good. And that means he'll probably be more likely to go on and do it. But humiliation as a kind of weapon from a teacher, like, it's not, you know, it's not good in any context. So.
No. Oh. Right. Did we ask you, Gemma, how you started working? Have you answered? I feel that you
kind of, yeah. So I think I mentioned before I worked in marketing for sort of 10, 20, not 20 years. I'm not that old, 15 years, and I was okay at it. I sort of came out of university. I studied English literature and drama at university. I originally wanted to go to RADA and be an actress. That wasn't really something that was feasible given my kind of family background. We were a bit skint, and it was a case of if you're going to university, then you need to go and do something that's kind of financially viable, because careers in the arts weren't really looked on in those days, and they probably still aren't to a certain extent as kind of viable careers or things that will make you much money. So I ended up compromising. I did English literature as well as drama, and then I came out and worked in a coffee shop for about 3 years because I didn't know what to do, and then just sort of fell into marketing, did that, and realised over a 10-year period that I wasn't very good at it, because I didn't like it very much. And I've said this on other interviews, like I really resented trying to sell things that people didn't want to people who, do you know what I mean? It was just, It felt like I was investing an awful lot of energy and time and passion into something that wasn't really going to come back and benefit me personally or anybody really. I got married and had a little boy, and I got very sick. I struggled a lot with PTSD and to do with his birth, and then over a period of years realised that I had real issues with postnatal depression. I had a lot of kind of really quite dark times and experiences, and the kind of long story short was I was made redundant, sort of not once but twice, from 2 jobs in a succession. It all just sort of came to a head. I then found myself, because my kids started school, I found myself with suddenly no job and a hell of a lot of time on my hands and an awful lot of things to process and to work through emotionally. So I just started writing. I just sat down. I got into a lovely routine where I dropped my kid off at school and went and sat in a coffee shop straight after and wrote from 9 until 1 every day. And I just, that became my kind of therapy. Yep. Interestingly, the book that I wrote at the time is now the novel that I'm adapting into this kind of virtual reality thriller. So that nothing you ever write is ever wasted. You always recycle things and reuse things. And I also, because I had a lot of time on my hands, I realised I needed to sort of fill my time with media and stuff. So I started getting into podcasts, and I didn't really know much about podcasts, but I stumbled across this horror anthology show called the No Sleep Podcast, which you can see my t-shirt.
Woohoo! Nice.
And my boobs, and both fine things. And it was insanely addictive, because every single episode had maybe 4 or 5 stories in. It started off, the show host is a chap called David Cummings, and he sort of started off, I think, recording it in his bedroom on a laptop, and he took creepy pasta stories from the subreddit No Sleep and turned them into these audio drama, narrated audio stories. Very basic to begin with, and then over the years, as it became more and more popular, he began to hire kind of professional voice actors, and there's a composer that writes incredible music for each story, and the sound effects and the sound design. It just became really cinematic. And I discovered that they accepted submissions. So I kind of went back to basics, and I wrote my first short story and I sent it to them, and they accepted it. It just basically took off from there, really. I think I've had 17 stories on the show now over a couple of series, and with a lot more stuff to come. And I met a publisher through them who published my first book, Cruel Works of Nature, which was my first short story collection. And a lot of these stories are on the No Sleep podcast, or the couple that aren't. this started to do reasonably well, a lot better than I thought it would, actually, being an indie publisher. And then I kind of parted ways with them and republished it myself. I then decided I wanted to write something different. I was kind of buoyed by my success of that first book, so I wrote my novella Dear Laura. And for whatever reason, this book just, I think maybe because it's quite small, it's a novella, it's priced a nice, it's a good price point, it's quite an accessible book. It just sort of took off really well, and it ended up with a Bram Stoker nomination, which was just, I was absolutely gobsmacked. I kind of almost entered it in last minute, just thinking not really much of it. I didn't think about it after I'd entered it in. I just thought, oh, why not? And then when I got the email that it had made the kind of long list, I was just over the moon. And then shortlist, and it was so surreal. And I think things really started to sort of develop for me from that point on, in terms of people started approaching me for stuff and asking me to get involved in things, and that made a huge difference to how financially viable this career is as well. So again, people like Cemetery Gates Media, who asked me to put together this short story, Grief is a False God, which is beautifully illustrated by Annabelle Santos. Let's find a good one. So just absolutely gorgeous stuff. In fact, I think his art's better than my story. So that's out. And then I just I then decided I wanted to write a full novel. So I'd never really finished a full novel. I'd tried over the years, as I said before, and I knew I needed some accountability. So I decided to fundraise and do a Kickstarter for this bad boy, White Pines, which took me 1 year and 3 months to write in the end. It was as painful as giving birth without the drugs, and I think people are enjoying it. It kind of got swallowed by COVID a bit, and I still haven't been able to get every one of my Kickstarter backers their copies. There's boxes of books lying around. I'm doing it as we speak, and then finally another short story collection came out this year called These Wounds We Make, which Ross very kindly edited for me. I think the reason, just to go back to your question, that I started writing is, it's hard to pin down, but I've always done it. Like, ever since I was a kid, I've just always read and written, and I think it just lived inside me and always has. And it's just, if I don't do it, I'm very miserable. I guess I was kind of born to do it. Like, it sounds cliche, but I can't think of any other way to describe it. If I don't write, I'm not really me. So, yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm really sorry, but I'm going to have to duck out. So I don't know if you want to continue after.
We only had the writing process left. So if you have to go, we can probably just quickly wind it up. Yep. Ross and Gemma, are you both happy? I mean, we've been going for nearly an hour and a half anyway.
Yeah, no, I'm
good.
Are
you both happy to sort of wind up now? Well, in that case, thank you both ever so much for coming on. We would usually now say, is there anything that you want to plug? But I think you've both talked about your up and coming things anyway. Ross, where can we find you if we want to get hold of you?
You can find me on Twitter. Ross 1982, I think it is. YouTube, I've set up a YouTube channel there that's doing all right. Come along. You hear me talking about books. But yeah, my home's normally on Twitter. That's where I'm most active. And then all my books are on Amazon. So yeah, that's it really.
And looking out for Tome, hopefully end of October.
Yeah, that should be, the plan is that I will push the kind of publish button around about the 26th, I think, is the kind of in my head, and hopefully that will be out by October time.
Awesome. And Gemma, where can people get a hold of you?
You can find me on, basically put my name into Google and I'm everywhere on Google these days.
Yeah.
I don't mean that in an arrogant way. I just mean that it's fortuitously worked out that I've got a bit of a Google presence. So social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. I have a Facebook page. And if you want sort of easy access to some of my stories without having to buy the book, then you can kind of go to the No Sleep podcast website, which is easy enough to find. Put my name into the search bar, and there's also just listen to the No Sleep podcast because it's just amazing from start to
yeah.
And they cover stories by people like Dathan Auerbach. They did the whole Pen Pal series, and it's just really, really worthwhile listening to. They're amazing.
Yeah,
good
and it's another thing about the good thing about podcast stories as well is you can be getting on with other stuff while you're listening to it. So yeah,
I've never done so much housework in my life. It's the only reason I do housework. So
yeah, okay, brilliant. Anything you want to quickly throw in, Lou?
No.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you both very much, and good luck with your new ventures.
Cool. Well, thanks for having me.
Thanks, Emma.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.